Hey friends, I'm coming off of a couple of sessions today, one or two with students and one with my own coach, and some really good stuff is coming up. It's actually, I was kind of leaning into an issue with my own coaching call. I was kind of leaning into an issue that I was trying to unpack for myself why this issue is so emotionally, why I'm sort of so trapped by it, why I keep replaying the same kind of rehearsed monologues or rehearsed interactions. And what came up on this call, there's a kind of like vortex of forces colliding, because Katie and I also watched the beginning of a really great show yesterday by Brené Brown. It's called The Atlas of the Heart, and it's basically a video series of a workshop she gave on the emotions, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I was leaning into, why do I seem I'm able to put this issue down, but only ever temporarily. I'm never able to put it down kind of once and for all, and in a way that feels like, okay, now I'm really free of it. So what my coach said, which was really powerful, is, well, we invite people and experiences into our life to learn lessons. That's what we're here for. And I had a session with an acupuncturist the other day who pointed out, he said in the Taoist tradition, the most fundamental reason why we are here on earth is to have experiences. And so the function of the body and the function of organs, the function of all of the sort of medical traditions that he's studied as an acupuncturist and medical practitioner. I don't think he would call himself a Taoist, but the function of that is to serve our capacity to have experiences. And even something as fundamental as eating, there's organs that have to do with digestion, metabolism, and there are acupuncture channels that can affect those organs and that metabolism. But ultimately, those organs that are about metabolizing food are only subsidiary aspects of the larger function of the channel. The larger function of the channel is to help us assimilate and digest experience. And it's funny because we kind of get that flipped sometimes, not necessarily from a strictly Western point of view, but just from a kind of like, it's easy to think, well, food is like the most fundamental thing. So that's what, that's a kind of like more fundamental thing than our higher experiences, right? If you don't have food covered, you're not gonna be around too long to be having experiences. But from the Taoist point of view, that's exactly flipped. The only reason that we need to be able to digest and assimilate food is because there's work to be done on another level, is so that we can continue going through the world having experiences. So there's a flip that takes place where our essentially spiritual growth is the reason for everything else. It's like it's the thing that everything else is serving. And so back to my conundrum, I was looking at like, why can I never seem to put this issue down, once and for all? I can put it down here and there. And what Corinne was just super lucid about pointing out was, well, you've invited this experience into your life to teach you a lesson. That's the most fundamental thing happening here. There's a lesson you're learning, and that you seem to have not yet learned because you keep inviting this experience into yourself. You keep, and what she was basically pointing out was, you don't have control of your own emotions. Other people and other circumstances control your emotions, and you keep wanting to go affect those people and circumstances with the hope that they will give you better emotions. And that will never work. And that's, I think, a very accurate diagnosis of what's going on, because there's a level on which I kind of do have this indignation about, you should give me better emotions. You should not treat me in a way that makes me feel like this. Feels like childhood programming. Feels like a childhood thing where I'm just blindly attached to the idea that someone else shouldn't make me feel like this. But in that equation, baked into that cake, is the assumption that other people can make me feel, that my own emotions are not actually fully under my control, that other people do have enough sway or enough power over me to make me feel things. And then I get very righteously indignant about what they're making me feel and how, and whether they should be doing that. So in other words, it's like I think that I'm being the sort of like righteous rebel, but what I don't see is that I have cast myself in the role of the victim before the process even starts. So I'm diagnosing a problem, and I put myself in the position of kind of punching up at the power that is being unjustly wielded over me. But I choose to put the power over me before I start diagnosing all the things that are wrong and unjust about the thing that the power is doing to me. Right? So that's a subtle thing, because that's the part of the process that I almost never actually catch. In order for me to go into these angry tirades internally, never really get expressed, I have to have made the decision to be subservient to that power that I then get to rail against. So that's something to digest. It reminds me of a story by Sadhguru. He basically tells this story in the book Karma. He talks about, there's a man who decides that he wants to be spiritually enlightened. So he goes and practices every day, and he sits under retreat, and every day he sits and meditates, and then he, little by little, as he gets hungry, because of course you sit for hours, he gets hungry. Every time he gets hungry, he goes to town and has a meal. Well, one day he's sitting meditating, and he sees this fox that has it's like missing 2 legs. It's crippled, can barely walk, but it's plump. The fox walks up, and he's like, "What's this? How does this crippled fox, this thing that can't even walk properly, how is it staying so well fed?" Well, he watches it for a little while, and then this lion comes along, brings a carcass to the fox and drops it in front of the fox, and the fox starts eating the food. And the man goes, "Oh, it's a sign. Even a crippled fox is provided for. And maybe that means that I should sit here. I will be provided for. If I just stay with my spiritual practice, I should prioritize what's most important to me, and I will be provided for. So he sits for days without going into town for a meal. Several days go by. He's fatigued and running. He's starving to death after 5 or 6 days. And a yogi comes by and sees him in this state on the verge of death and says, "What happened to you?" And the man says, "I saw a sign from heaven. A lion brought food to a crippled fox, and I thought it was a divine message that I would be provided for." "Was it a divine message?" he asks the yogi. And the yogi says, "Of course it was a divine message. But why did you decide to imitate the crippled fox instead of the generous lion?" That's what I'm doing. That was a long-winded story to say that's what I'm doing in a way. I'm saying I'm below this power, and then I'm going to go and criticize everything that's wrong with it. And so that's a massive lesson. That is a massive lesson, because it's really kind of like, it's the part of the picture that almost doesn't make it into the analysis, because it's like the assumptions, or it's like the givens in the scientific experiment. When you start a scientific hypothesis, you start with a set of givens, and then you make a hypothesis, and then you run an experiment to confirm or deny the hypothesis. Well, the existence of a power over me is something that I treat like a given. So then it feels completely normal and in all ways totally justifiable and correct to burst, to sort of like be in rebellion to that power. But once I have to kind of look at the fact that I am choosing to put that power there, I have the control over my own emotions. Nothing outside of me is going to give me better emotions. That's not a thing. So once that hits home, a completely different set of actions becomes possible. It completely changes the landscape of the decision-making process. There's nothing about the previous version of reality where I've kind of cast myself in a certain role and cast others in a certain role. There's nothing about that reality that has any purchase with the reality that immediately becomes available once I realize that that's what I'm doing, and that I don't have to do that, and that I actually entirely control my own emotions. And in fact, that act of casting someone else in a power position over me is an act of responsibility for my own emotions. It's something I am doing so that I can feel something. All of it falls within the realm of my own responsibility and my own agency. Once that's clear, it's like everything, all the other doors open, and all the other options that were just not even, were nothing about the game, about the lay of the land is the same. Nothing about it is the same. There's something else I want to talk about, which because this is very directly related to my post, this post is directly related to what I mentioned about Brené Brown and her video series. Because basically, there's something that Sadhguru says. He talks about how one of the issues with kind of civilized societies, the developed world basically, is that people don't experience their emotions. We've been taught not to experience them, and so we repress them, and so we walk around and emotions build up residue in our bodies. It's like undigested food. If you kept eating food but didn't digest it, what would happen? You'd be a mess. You'd be ingesting all this stuff and not letting it out. Well, it's exactly what's happening with emotion. Emotion is energy that we're ingesting, but not feeling. So it doesn't process. It doesn't move. And one of the things that Brené Brown says in her one of her kind of outgoing principles of her work is that, and there's a whole, she talks about a whole survey that they conducted to establish this, is that people don't have the language to articulate their emotions, by and large. Most people don't. Most people have access to about 3 emotions: glad, sad, and pissed off. Happy, sad, and pissed off. Happy, sad, and mad. And what that means, because that's not the full spectrum of emotions, she has written a book where she goes in depth into the distinctions between something like 87 completely distinct, separate emotions. And this workshop that she runs is like, they go into like 30 of them. I can't wait to watch the rest of the series. But that without the language to express those, to articulate those emotions, we can't even feel them properly. We have to compress these complex, distinct, and deeply individual types of body, psycho-emotional feeling into a couple of very tiny categories like glad, sad, and mad. So we don't feel what's there. Forget communicating with anybody else about it. That's a whole other, that's like next level. But even within ourselves, we can't really understand what we're feeling. So this plays to me right into what Sadhguru is saying. If we can't talk about what we're feeling, if we don't even know what it means to feel something, and we can't articulate to ourselves what that feeling is, we have to compress it into one of those tiny little compartmentalized boxes that we feel like we have access to. Well, then of course we're not going to feel it properly. Of course it's going to stay kind of trapped because we're not seeing it. We're not witnessing it. Our witnessing of the feeling is getting truncated by the fact that it's getting categorized preemptively, and it's like a square peg that you just mash into a round hole and act as though, yeah, that's where that belongs. So that's a whole other, I can promise you I'll have more to say about that because we're going to keep watching that series. But it really showed up for me, this lesson around I actually have control of these emotions. I really am the one who determines what I feel, and letting that be seeing what options present themselves when I lean into that, when I really truly let that land. So thanks for watching, folks. It's a long one. It's a big one. I appreciate you. Much love. Have a great day. See you tomorrow.